I divorced my husband when I caught him with my best friend. Through fraudulent paperwork, they took everything I had. Broke, I went to my abandoned childhood home. There, I discovered a dusty suitcase labeled with my name. $70,000, a ticket, and a note. This is just travel money. The real inheritance awaits. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me tell you how a 62-year-old woman with arthritic knees and reading glasses learned to swing for the fences. 3 weeks ago, I was Margaret Maggie Thompson, devoted wife, PDA volunteer, and apparently the world's biggest fool. Today, I'm sitting in my childhood home in Millbrook, Ohio, population 847, staring at $70,000 in cash and wondering how the hell my dead grandmother knew this day would come. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to the beginning when I still believed promises meant something and thought my biggest problem was Marcus forgetting to replace the toilet paper roll. It started with a phone call from our bank on a Tuesday morning. The cheerful voice informed me that our mortgage payment had bounced. Weird, since I'd seen Marcus deposit his paycheck the day before. When I called Marcus at his insurance office, his secretary Linda said he was in meetings all day. Strange, considering Linda usually chatted my ear off about her cats. I drove to the bank myself, armed with our joint account information and growing suspicion. The teller, a sweet girl named Jessica, who'd processed my deposits for 15 years, looked uncomfortable as she pulled up our records. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm sorry, but you're not listed as an authorized user on any of these accounts anymore." The words hit me like ice water. That's impossible. I opened this account with my husband in 1987. Jessica's eyes darted nervously. The account was restructured 6 months ago. Only Marcus Thompson has access now. 6 months ago. Right around the time Marcus started working late every Tuesday and Thursday. Right around the time my best friend Carol started canceling our weekly coffee dates because she was too busy with work projects. I sat in my car outside the bank, hands shaking as I dialed Marcus' cell phone straight to voicemail. Same with Carol. The pieces were clicking together like bullets loading into a chamber, and I didn't like where this was heading. That's when I decided to go home and search through Marcus's desk. What I found in his home office made my blood pressure spike to stroke levels. Hidden under a stack of old insurance claims were bank statements for accounts I'd never seen before. Our entire life savings, $127,000, had been transferred into a single account with only Marcus's name on it. Worse, there were withdrawal records showing he'd been moving money systematically for 3 years. But the real kick in the teeth came with the lawyer's business card tucked behind the statements. Harold Webster, divorce attorney, with a consultation appointment scheduled for next Friday. The son of a gun was planning to divorce me and leave me with nothing. He just hadn't gotten around to telling me yet. I was still sitting at his desk seeing red when I heard his key in the front door. Marcus walked in whistling. Actually whistling like he hadn't just destroyed our marriage and my financial security in one neat package. "Hey honey, how was your day?" he called out cheerfully. That's when I realized what I had to do. "Marcus," I called sweetly from his office. "Could you come in here for a minute? I need help understanding some paperwork." He appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie with that easy smile that had charmed me for over 2 decades. Now it just made me want to throw his desk lamp at his head. "What's wrong, Maggie? You look upset." I held up the bank statements, watching his face carefully. "I was at the bank today. Seems there's been some kind of mistake with our accounts." The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. "Good. Let him sweat." "Oh," that he stammered, running a hand through his graying hair. "I was going to talk to you about that. It's just some financial restructuring to protect our assets. Tax purposes, you know." "Tax purposes," I repeated slowly by removing my name from every account we own. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, and I noticed he kept glancing toward the door like he was planning an escape route. After 23 years of marriage, I could read this man like a grocery store tabloid. "Maggie, I know it looks bad, but I can explain everything. Why don't we sit down in the living room? I'll make us some coffee." "I think I'll stand. Thanks." I picked up Harold Webster's business card. "So, tell me about your divorce lawyer consultation next Friday." If Marcus had looked pale before, now he looked like a corpse. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. And for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "How did you?" He caught himself. "Maggie, please let me explain." Oh, I'm listening. This should be fascinating. Marcus slumped against the doorframe, his carefully constructed double life crumbling around him. It's not what you think really, because what I think is that you've been systematically stealing our money while planning to divorce me. Probably so you can run off with Carol Henderson and leave me with nothing. Am I close? His silence was all the confirmation I needed. How long? I asked quietly. Maggie, how long, Marcus? 3 years, he whispered. 3 years. While I was planning anniversary dinners and shopping for Christmas gifts, he was planning my financial destruction. While I was trusting him with our life savings, he was plotting to steal every penny. Get out, I said calmly. Maggie, please, we can work this out. The money is still there. I just moved it for safekeeping. Get out of this house right now, or I'm calling the police. Marcus straightened up, and for a moment I saw a flash of the stranger. He'd apparently been all along. This is my house too, Maggie. You can't just kick me out. Actually, I can, because according to the property records I checked this afternoon, you quietly transferred ownership of this house to yourself last year too, which means you committed fraud, and I have every right to report it. That stopped him cold. You checked the property records. I may be a trusting wife, Marcus, but I'm not stupid. You want this house? You can have it. Along with all the memories of what you destroyed for a few extra dollars in a cheap affair. I walked past him toward the kitchen, my hands remarkably steady considering the circumstances. You have 1 hour to pack what you need. After that, you can deal with my lawyer. Your lawyer? He followed me, panic creeping into his voice. Maggie, you don't understand the legal complications here. If you try to fight this, you could end up with nothing at all. I turned around slowly, and something in my expression made him take a step back. Marcus, you seem to forget that I managed our finances for 20 years before you decided to become a criminal. I know exactly what we own, what it's worth, and what you've stolen. More importantly, I know things about your business practices that might interest the insurance commission. His face went white again. Apparently I'd hit a nerve. The Henderson account, I continued conversationally. You remember Carol's husband's business insurance that you personally handled? The one where you inflated the premiums by 30% and pocketed the difference? I helped you with those calculations, remember? Before I knew what they were really for. Marcus grabbed the kitchen counter for support. You wouldn't try me. That's when he realized that his devoted, trusting wife had just turned into his worst nightmare. Marcus left that night with 2 suitcases and his tail between his legs. I changed the locks before his tail lights disappeared down Maple Street. Thank goodness for 24-hour locksmith services and a hefty emergency credit card he didn't know about. The next morning, I called Harold Webster's office myself. I'd like to schedule a consultation, I told his secretary. My husband, Marcus Thompson, has an appointment Friday, but I think I should go first. Harold Webster turned out to be exactly what I expected. A shark in an expensive suit with the moral flexibility of a contortionist. He sat across from his mahogany desk, reviewing the files Marcus had already provided, occasionally glancing up at me with poorly concealed surprise. Mrs. Thompson, I have to say this is unusual. Your husband portrayed the situation quite differently. I'm sure he did. What exactly did he tell you? Harold cleared his throat delicately. He indicated that you were financially irresponsible, that you've been making poor decisions with joint assets, and he was concerned about protecting the family's long-term security. I almost laughed. And you believed him? The documentation he provided was quite thorough. Bank records showing large unexplained withdrawals from savings accounts, credit card debts, canceled insurance policies, all of which he created himself after removing my access to our accounts. I pulled out my own folder. 23 years of meticulously kept financial records. Here's the real documentation, Mr. Webster. Every bank statement, every canceled check, every investment decision we made together until last year when Marcus decided to play financial dictator. Harold studied my papers with increasing interest. These records are very detailed. I was a bookkeeper before I married Marcus. Old habits and very damaging to your husband's case. Mrs. Thompson, if these documents are accurate, your husband has committed several serious crimes. Multiple felonies, I believe fraud, theft, identity theft, possibly conspiracy if Carol Henderson was involved in the financial planning. Harold leaned back in his chair, clearly recalculating his strategy. What exactly are you looking for in a divorce settlement? Everything he stole, plus damages for emotional distress, legal fees, and the cost of rebuilding my life from scratch. That's aggressive. So is systematically destroying your wife's financial security while planning to abandon her for your secretary's best friend. Harold actually smiled at that. You know, Mrs. Thompson, I think I misjudged this situation. Would you be interested in engaging my services instead? That depends. Are you better at offense or defense? Both. But I have a feeling you're going to need offense. I left Harold's office with a retainer agreement and a strategy that would make Marcus' head spin. Step 1, freeze all joint assets immediately. Step 2, file fraud charges. Step 3, make him pay for every penny he'd stolen plus interest. But first I had a phone call to make. Carol Henderson answered on the third ring, her voice sugar-sweet and fake as artificial vanilla. Maggie, how are you? Honey, I heard about the troubles with Marcus. Did you now? And where exactly did you hear that, Carol? A pause. Oh, you know how small towns are. Word travels. Especially when you're the one spreading it. Tell me, Carol, how long have you been practicing for the role of home wrecker? 'Cause you're really quite good at it. Another pause. Longer this time. Maggie, I don't know what you think you know. I know Marcus has been hiding money in accounts you helped him set up. I know you've been covering for his absences from work. And I know you've been planning this little financial heist together for 3 years. That's ridiculous, is it? Because my lawyer seems to think conspiracy charges are on the table, especially when one conspirator happens to work at the bank where the fraudulent accounts were opened. Silence. Interesting. Carol, honey, I continued in my sweetest voice. You might want to call your own lawyer. I have a feeling you're going to need one. I hung up before she could respond, feeling satisfied for the first time in weeks. Let her sweat for a while. That afternoon, I drove out to my grandmother's house for the first time since her funeral 3 years ago. The old Victorian sat on 5 acres outside town, looking exactly as run down and forgotten as I'd left it. Weeds had overtaken the garden. Paint was peeling from the shutters, and the front porch sagged like an old woman's back. But it was mine, free and clear. And more importantly, it was somewhere Marcus had never been. I found the spare key under the same flower pot where Grandma Rose had kept it for 40 years, and let myself into the musty silence of my childhood memories. Everything was covered in dust sheets, but underneath the furniture was solid and well made. The bones of the house were good. That's when I found the suitcase. It was sitting on my grandmother's bed, ancient leather worn smooth with age, with a manila tag tied to the handle in my grandmother's careful handwriting for Margaret when she needs it most. Inside were stacks of cash neatly bundled and counted. I've been expecting this day since your wedding when I saw how he looked at money like it was more important than people. This is just travel money, sweetheart. The real inheritance is waiting for you in London. Ask for James Morrison at Barclays Bank. Piccadilly branch. Trust no one until you get there. And remember, you're stronger than you know. Love always, Grandma Rose. I sat on that dusty bed holding $7,000 in cash and realized my grandmother had been planning my escape route for 23 years. The only question now was, did I have the courage to use it? I stared at that plane ticket until my eyes burned. London tomorrow, a city I'd never visited to meet a banker I'd never heard of, following instructions from a grandmother who'd been dead for 3 years, but apparently knew more about my future than I did. The smart thing would be to stay and fight Marcus through the courts, take him for everything he'd stolen, make him pay for the betrayal, rebuild my life in familiar territory. The safe thing would be to move into Grandma's house, get a job at the local diner, and live quietly on whatever scraps Harold Webster could salvage from the wreckage of my marriage. But as I sat in that dusty bedroom holding a passport I didn't remember applying for and cash that shouldn't exist, I realized my grandmother hadn't raised me to do the smart thing or the safe thing. She'd raised me to do the right thing. And the right thing was getting as far away from Marcus Thompson and his financial games as possible. I spent the next 18 hours in a whirlwind of preparation. First, I met with Harold Webster to set up an automatic legal strategy. Let him handle the divorce proceedings while I was out of the country. Keep Marcus and Carol tied up in depositions and court filings. Make their lives as complicated as they'd made mine. Are you sure about this international travel? Harold asked, reviewing the power of attorney documents. It might look like you're fleeing. I'm not fleeing. I'm regrouping. There's a difference. And if your husband tries to claim abandonment, let him try. Hard to claim abandonment when he's the one who stole our life savings and moved in with his mistress. Harold smiled grimly. Fair point. How long will you be gone? As long as it takes. I closed my bank accounts, packed 2 suitcases with everything that mattered, and left detailed instructions with Harold about handling the house sale. Marcus could have the mortgage payments along with all the maintenance, taxes, and repairs that came with a 20-year-old suburban colonial that was falling apart at the seams. The hardest part was calling my sister Ginny in Portland. You're doing what? She shrieked when I explained my travel plans. Maggie, have you lost your mind? You can't just fly to London based on some crazy letter from Grandma Rose. Why not? Because you're 62 years old. You don't speak the language. You don't know anyone there. They speak English in London, Jenny. And I know James Morrison at Barclays Bank. You've never heard of James Morrison until yesterday. Details. This is insane. Maggie, come stay with me instead. Portland's nice. You could get a job. Meet someone normal. Jenny, I've spent 23 years being safe and normal. Look how that turned out. There was a long pause. You're really going to do this? I'm really going to do this. Then I'm proud of you, she said quietly, scared out of my mind but proud. Call me when you get there. I hung up, feeling lighter than I had in months. The flight to London was my first time overseas, and I spent 8 hours alternating between terror and excitement. What if Grandma Rose had lost her mind in her final years? What if this James Morrison didn't exist? What if the whole thing was some elaborate practical joke from beyond the grave? But as the plane descended through gray clouds toward Heathrow Airport, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. For the first time in decades, I had no idea what was coming next, and I liked it. James Morrison turned out to be a distinguished man in his 70s, with silver hair and the kind of crisp British accent that made everything sound important. He met me in the marble lobby of Barclays Bank on Piccadilly, shook my hand warmly, and led me to a private office overlooking the busy London street. Mrs. Thompson, he said, settling behind his. Did she never tell you about her import business? I shook my head, realizing how little I'd actually known about Grandma Rose's life before she became my guardian. Rose built a considerable fortune importing textiles from India in the 1950s and 60s. Quite ahead of her time, really. When she retired, she invested very wisely. James opened the file. She's left you quite an inheritance, Mrs. Thompson. How much? James smiled. 2.7 million. I'm pretty sure my heart stopped beating for a full 10 seconds. That's impossible, I whispered. Quite possible, I assure you. Rose was very specific about the conditions of the inheritance. You were to receive it only if your marriage ended badly, as she suspected it would. She felt Marcus was too interested in money to be trusted with it. 2.7 million pounds at current exchange rates. That was over 3 million pounds, more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. There's more, James continued. Rose also purchased a flat in Kensington in your name. It's been maintained and rented for income, but it's yours whenever you're ready to claim it. She bought me an apartment in London, a rather nice one according to the property reports. 2 bedrooms, garden view, walking distance to Hyde Park. I sat in that banker's office, staring at financial documents that proved my grandmother had not only expected my husband to betray me, but had spent decades preparing for it. She'd created an entire escape route, money, housing, even a fake passport to get me out of the country if needed. Why? I asked finally. Why go to all this trouble? James leaned back in his chair, his expression growing serious. Rose told me a story once about your grandfather, how he tried to control her finances after they married, how she almost lost everything she'd worked for. She said she'd be damned if she'd watch her granddaughter make the same mistake. But she never told me any of this. She didn't want to poison your marriage if Marcus turned out to be a good man. But she also didn't want you to be defenseless if he turned out to be like your grandfather. I thought about Marcus, probably sitting in our old house right now, trying to figure out how to track me down and get his hands on what he thought was my limited divorce settlement. If only he knew what Grandma Rose had really left me. James, I said slowly, I think I'd like to see that apartment. The flat in Kensington was everything James had promised and more. 2 spacious bedrooms with high ceilings, original hardwood floors that gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, and French doors that opened onto a small garden bursting with roses and jasmine. It felt like a movie set, the kind of place where sophisticated people sip tea and discuss literature. It felt nothing like the suburban house I'd shared with Marcus for 20 years. Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield, the property manager, handed me the keys with a warm smile. "Your grandmother was a lovely woman, Mrs. Thompson. She visited every few months to check on the flat. Always asked about the tenants, made sure everything was properly maintained. She came here regularly. Oh yes, for years. Said she wanted everything perfect for when her granddaughter finally came home." Home. It was a strange word to apply to a place I'd never seen before. But as I walked through the rooms, touching the furniture my grandmother had chosen, looking out at the garden she'd planned, it felt more like home than anywhere I'd lived in decades. That evening I called Harold Webster from my new landline. "Maggie, thank God. Marcus has been calling my office every hour, demanding to know where you are. What did you tell him? That you're unavailable for comment, and he should focus on explaining his financial crimes instead of tracking down his victims. How's the case going?" Harold chuckled. "Oh, it's going beautifully. Carol Henderson's bank records are fascinating reading. Turns out she helped Marcus set up 6 different accounts over 3 years, all designed to hide assets from you. Her supervisor was not pleased to learn one of his employees was facilitating fraud. She's been fired, arrested, and charged as an accessory. The bank is cooperating fully to avoid regulatory action. They've frozen all of Marcus' accounts and turned over every document we requested." I settled into the comfortable armchair by the window, watching London traffic stream past, and Marcus panicking. His lawyer called today trying to negotiate a settlement. "Apparently, your husband is claiming he moved the money to protect it from your irresponsible spending habits." Irresponsible spending habits? That's what he claims. Says you were running up credit card debts and making poor financial decisions. I almost laughed. In 23 years of marriage, my biggest financial indulgence had been buying premium coffee instead of the store brand. "Harold, I want you to demand a full financial accounting going back 5 years. Every account, every transaction, every penny he's touched. And I want Carol Henderson's cooperation agreement to include testimony about her role in the conspiracy already in motion." "Maggie, I have to ask, where are you getting the money for this kind of aggressive legal strategy? These depositions and financial investigations are expensive. Let's just say my grandmother left me better prepared than anyone imagined." "How much better prepared?" "Well enough that I'm not worried about legal fees." Harold was quiet for a moment. "Maggie, should I be preparing for a much larger settlement demand?" "Harold, I want you to take Marcus for everything he's worth, everything he stole, everything he hid, everything he thought he could get away with, and then I want punitive damages for pain and suffering." "That's aggressive. So as systematically stealing your wife's financial security, while planning to abandon her." "Fair point. I'll drop the papers." After I hung up, I made another call. This one to a number I'd found in my grandmother's papers. "Morrison and Associates Private Investigation." A crisp voice answered. "I'd like to speak with someone about locating hidden assets." "Certainly. May I ask who referred you?" "Rose Morrison recommended your services." There was a pause. "Mrs. Thompson?" "Yes. We've been expecting your call for 3 years." Apparently, my grandmother's preparation had been even more thorough than I'd realized. Morrison and Associates. No relation to James Morrison at Barclays despite the name, specialized in finding money that people tried to hide. International accounts, offshore trusts, shell companies, cryptocurrency wallets. If Marcus had been squirreling away money beyond what Harold had already found, they would find it. "Your grandmother retained our services in advance," the investigator, Patricia Cole, explained when we met the next day. "She wanted us ready to move immediately if you ever needed us. She thought Marcus was hiding more than just our joint accounts. She suspected he was the type of man who always kept an escape fund. Men like your husband rarely put all their eggs in one basket." Patricia had steel gray hair, sharp eyes, and the kind of professional demeanor that suggested she'd uncovered more than her share of financial secrets over the years. "We'll need about 6 weeks for a comprehensive search," she continued. "Bank records, property searches, business partnerships, investment accounts. If he's got money hidden, we'll find it. 6 weeks, 42 days to tear apart Marcus' financial life the way he'd torn apart mine." I spent those weeks exploring London like a tourist but planning like a general. I visited museums and galleries, walked through Hyde Park, discovered tiny restaurants in hidden corners of the city, but I also met with investment advisors, real estate agents, and legal experts. If I was going to build a new life, I wanted it built on solid ground. The call from Patricia came on a rainy Thursday morning. "Mrs. Thompson, I think you'll want to see this in person." I met her at a coffee shop in Covent Garden where she spread documents across our table, like a dealer shuffling cards. "Your husband is more creative than we expected," she said without preamble. "We found 11 separate accounts in 4 different countries, Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and 2 in Ireland. Total hidden assets, approximately $847,000. I stared at the papers. Nearly $1 million that Marcus had stolen and hidden. Money he'd planned to disappear with when he finally left me. "There's more," Patricia continued. "He's been doing this for 5 years, not 3. The affair with Carol Henderson was just the latest phase. We found evidence of at least 2 other relationships where he used joint assets to impress other women. 5 years, a quarter of our marriage had been a lie. And the insurance business. Systematic fraud, inflated premiums, fabricated claims, kickbacks from preferred contractors. We estimate he's stolen over $200,000 from clients over the past 4 years." Patricia slid another document across the table. "But this is the interesting part. Your husband has been planning to disappear for over a year. He's got new identity documents, a property purchase agreement in Costa Rica, and plane tickets for next month." I looked at the Costa Rica property listing. A beachfront villa with a private dock, and no extradition treaty with the United States. He was going to leave me with nothing and disappear to Costa Rica. That appears to be the plan. Leave you holding the bag for his business debts, his legal problems, and his tax issues while he starts fresh in a country that doesn't cooperate with U.S. law enforcement. I thought about the woman I'd been 6 weeks ago. Trusting and naive, planning anniversary dinners while my husband planned my financial destruction. That woman would have been devastated by this betrayal. The woman sitting in this London coffee shop felt something entirely different. "Relief, Patricia," I said slowly. "I want copies of everything you found sent to Harold Webster immediately. And I want you to notify the appropriate authorities about the insurance fraud and the hidden assets. The IRS will be very interested in those offshore accounts. I'm sure they will be." I walked home through the London rain, thinking about Marcus' carefully planned escape to Costa Rica. How long had he been laughing at me, playing the devoted husband while planning to leave me broke and alone? It didn't matter now because Grandma Rose had planned better than he had. And tomorrow Harold Webster was going to destroy him. The phone rang at 6 a.m. London time, midnight in Ohio. Harold Webster's voice was practically vibrating with excitement. "Maggie, you need to know what's happening here. Marcus showed up at my office this morning with his lawyer, demanding to know your location and insisting on an immediate settlement conference." I propped myself up in bed, reaching for the cup of tea I'd learned to keep on my nightstand. "What did you tell him?" "That his client was in no position to make demands." Considering the new evidence we'd received, when I started reading from Patricia's report about the Cayman Islands accounts, his lawyer actually went pale. How pale are we talking? Vampire pale? Dead fish pale? Marcus started sweating so much I thought we'd need to call an ambulance. I smiled, sipping my tea and watching the London dawn creep across my bedroom ceiling. Did he try to explain the hidden accounts? Oh, he tried. Said they were investment vehicles for your mutual benefit. That he was planning to surprise you with the returns. His lawyer kept kicking him under the table to shut him up. And the Costa Rica property, that's when things got really interesting. Marcus claims he was buying it as a vacation home for your retirement. When I mentioned the fake identity documents, his lawyer stood up and said they needed to rescue. How soon until the authorities get involved? The IRS is already moving. They raided his office yesterday afternoon, seized all his computers and files. The insurance commission suspended his license pending investigation. And the local police want to interview him about the fraud charges. I set down my teacup, feeling a deep satisfaction settle in my chest. Is he still with Carol? Not anymore. She threw him out when she got arrested. He's living in a motel on Route 9. Driving that old pickup truck since the BMW was seized as a potential asset. Marcus in a motel driving his 15-year-old truck. watching his carefully constructed life collapse in real time. 6 weeks ago, that image would have broken my heart. Now it just seemed like justice. Harold, what are our chances of getting everything back? Everything plus damages plus interest plus legal fees. Maggie, when this is over, Marcus Thompson is going to owe you money. After I hung up, I called James Morrison at Barraclays. I think it's time to start making some investments. Excellent. Did you have anything particular in mind? I want to buy my grandmother's old house back. The one in Ohio? The one Marcus is probably going to lose in the divorce settlement. I want to purchase it at market value and turn it into something useful, such as I thought about my grandmother's letter, about the women she'd known who'd lost everything to controlling husbands. A shelter for women getting out of bad marriages who need a safe place to rebuild their lives. A worthy cause. I'll have our property acquisition team handle the details. And James, I want to do it anonymously. Marcus doesn't need to know who's buying his precious house until after the sale is final. I understand completely. That afternoon, I walked through Kensington Gardens thinking about the life I was building. At 62, most people would say I was too old to start over, too old to live in a foreign country, too old to learn new ways of doing things, too old to risk everything on an uncertain future. Those people had never met my grandmother. My phone rang as I sat by the Diana Memorial, watching tourists take pictures and children feed the ducks. Maggie, it was Jenny calling from Portland. I just heard the most amazing thing from Mom's old neighbor in Millbrook. Is it true that Marcus is living in a motel? It's true. And that the FBI raided his office. Arrest but close enough. Holy crap, Maggie. What did you do to him? I stopped letting him steal from me. The whole town is talking about it. Apparently, Carol Henderson is telling everyone who will listen that you hired international criminals to frame them. I laughed out loud, startling a nearby pigeon. International criminals? That's her story. She's claiming you disappeared to Europe to hire mob lawyers who specialize in destroying innocent small businessmen. Well, she's half right. I did disappear to Europe. Maggie, where exactly are you? I looked around at the manicured gardens, the elegant buildings, the ordered beauty of my new neighborhood. I'm home, Jenny. For the first time in 23 years, I'm home. That doesn't answer my question. Yes, it does. The next week brought a steady stream of updates from Harold. Marcus had been formally charged with insurance fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. Carol had agreed to testify against him in exchange for a reduced sentence. The divorce proceedings were moving forward with Marcus, offering increasingly desperate settlement proposals. He's willing to give you everything, Harold reported. The house, both cars, all the legitimate assets, plus $50,000 in damages. What about the hidden money? He claims that's tied up in legal proceedings and can't be touched. Counteroffer, everything he stole, everything he hid, everything he owns, plus $200,000 in punitive damages, plus all legal fees, plus a public apology in the Millbrook Gazette. Public apology. I want everyone in town to know exactly what kind of man Marcus Thompson really is. He'll never agree to that. Then we'll see him in court. But Marcus didn't want to go to court. 2 days later, Harold called with news that surprised even me. He's accepted everything except the public apology. Claims it would destroy his reputation in the community. His reputation is already destroyed. Tell him he can choose between a public apology or a very public trial where all his crimes get aired in open court. And if he still refuses, then we go to trial and let a jury decide how much his betrayal was worth. Marcus caved the next day. The apology ran in the Millbrook Gazette the following week. A full-page ad that Harold had written and I had approved. I, Marcus Thompson, publicly apologize to my wife Margaret Thompson for my unconscionable behavior during our marriage. I stole money from our joint accounts, hid assets in offshore accounts, committed insurance fraud using my position as a licensed agent, and betrayed my marriage vows by conducting multiple affairs. Margaret Thompson was an exemplary wife who deserved none of the pain and financial abuse I inflicted upon her. I accept full responsibility for the destruction of our marriage and the crimes I committed. Anyone considering doing business with me should be aware that I am currently under federal investigation for tax evasion and insurance fraud. Jenny called me that evening laughing so hard she could barely speak. Maggie, you evil genius. Do you know what you've done? Marcus can never show his face in Millbrook again. Every person in town has read that apology. They're talking about framing copies and hanging them in the diner. Good. Let them remember what happens when men think they can steal from their wives without consequences. I'm so proud of you. I could burst. When are you coming home? I looked out my window at the London street below, at the life I was building brick by brick. I am home, Jenny. But when are you coming back to visit? Soon, I promised. I have a house to renovate and a shelter to build. The call came on a Tuesday morning, while I was reading the Financial Times and eating toast with proper British jam. Harold Webster's voice was tight with barely controlled excitement. Maggie, you're not going to believe this. The FBI just arrested Marcus. I sat down my newspaper carefully for the insurance fraud. That plus money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Turns out your ex-husband was more creative than we thought. How creative? Remember those client accounts he was skimming from? He wasn't just inflating premiums. He was creating fake policies for non-existent clients, then filing fake claims and pocketing the payouts. The insurance company estimates he stole over $400,000 over 5 years. $400,000 on top of the $1 million he'd hidden offshore, and the money he'd stolen from our accounts. My ex-husband had been running a one-man crime syndicate. What about Carol? Singing like a canary. She provided detailed records of every transaction, every fake account, every forged document. Her lawyer negotiated immunity in exchange for complete cooperation. And Marcus, facing 20 to 30 years in federal prison, I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt something closer to pity. Marcus had destroyed his life for money he would never get to spend. Running schemes that were doomed to collapse the moment someone started asking the right questions. Harold, what happens to the settlement now? It stands. All the assets we recovered are legally yours. Plus the punitive damages. Marcus signed everything before he was arrested. How much? Final tally? $1.4 million plus the house plus his legitimate business assets. Maggie, you're officially a millionaire. A millionaire twice over, actually, counting my grandmother's inheritance. But Harold didn't need to know that. There's one more thing, Harold continued. Marcus wants to see you. Absolutely not. He's claiming he has information. You need to hear something about your grandmother. That stopped me cold. What about my grandmother? He won't say, but his lawyer insists it's important. I thought about Grandma Rose. About all the secrets she'd kept, all the preparations she'd made. What could Marcus possibly know about her that I didn't set up a meeting? But I want it in your office with you present and recorded. When? I'll fly back this weekend. The flight to Ohio felt strange, like traveling backward through time. 3 months ago, I'd left as a broken woman fleeing her husband's betrayal. Now I was returning as someone else entirely, financially independent, legally vindicated, and completely in control of my own destiny. Harold met me at the airport, and I barely recognized myself in the reflection in his car window. The timid Dowie housewife was gone, replaced by someone who looked confident, sophisticated, and completely unafraid. You look different, Harold observed as we drove to his office. I feel different. London agrees with you. Freedom agrees with me. Marcus was already waiting when we arrived, flanked by his court-appointed lawyer, and wearing an orange jumpsuit that made his complexion look sallow and defeated. He'd lost weight, and there were new lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 3 months ago. He looked up when I entered the room, and I saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, maybe? Or a recognition that the woman sitting across from him was not the same person he'd married. Hello, Marcus. Maggie. His voice was "Oh, I am good. Harold says you have something to tell me about my grandmother." Marcus glanced at his lawyer, who nodded encouragingly. I know why she left you all that money. She left it to me because she loved me. That's not the only reason. Marcus leaned forward. Rose came to see me 3 years before she died. She knew about Carol, about the money I was moving. She knew everything. I kept my expression neutral, but my pulse quickened. What did she say? She said she'd been watching me since our wedding day, waiting for me to show my true colors. She said men like me always reveal themselves eventually, and when I did, she wanted to make sure you had options. She was right, Maggie. She offered me money, a lot of money, $500,000 to divorce you cleanly and walk away. The room went quiet. Harold stopped taking notes and stared at Marcus. She offered to pay you to divorce me. She said she'd rather pay me to leave than watch me destroy you slowly. She said you deserved better than a man who saw you as a retirement plan. I thought about my grandmother sitting across from Marcus in her Victorian parlor, calmly negotiating my freedom before I even knew I needed it. What did you tell her? Marcus looked down at his shackled hands. I told her I loved you, that I would never hurt you, that she was wrong about me. But she wasn't wrong. No, she wasn't. He looked up at me with something that might have been regret. She said if I ever changed my mind, the offer would stand. All I had to do was call her lawyer and arrange a clean divorce. You'd get the house, I'd get the money, and everyone would walk away whole. Why didn't you take it? Because I thought I was smarter than she was. I thought I could have it all. You, your trust, and all the money I could steal. I thought I could play the game better than she could. Harold was scribbling furiously. This explains some things about your grandmother's estate planning. She knew, I said quietly. She knew exactly what kind of man he was, and she prepared for it. There's more, Marcus said. The house in London, she bought it specifically for you. She used to say that if a man betrayed you financially, the only solution was financial independence. She wanted to make sure you'd never have to depend on anyone again. I thought about my grandmother, spending decades building a safety net I didn't even know existed, preparing for a future she hoped would never come, but knew probably would. Why are you telling me this now, Marcus? Because I'm going to prison for a long time. And I wanted you to know that your grandmother was the smartest person either of us ever met. She saw through me from day one, and instead of just warning you, which you wouldn't have believed, she spent 20 years making sure you'd be okay when I finally showed my true colors. Marcus stood up, his chains rattling. I'm sorry, Maggie. Not sorry I got caught. Sorry I was the kind of man who needed to be caught. His lawyer led him away, and Harold and I sat in silence for several minutes. Your grandmother was remarkable, Harold finally said. She was. I wiped away tears I hadn't realized I was shedding. She saved my life before I even knew it needed saving. What now? I thought about the life waiting for me in London. About the money that would let me help other women the way my grandmother had helped me. About the house I was buying back from Marcus' creditors, the shelter I was planning to build. Now I go home and finish what she started. 6 months later, I stood in the living room of my childhood home, watching construction workers install new windows and update the electrical system. The Victorian mansion was being transformed from a neglected relic into something beautiful and functional, a haven for women rebuilding their lives after financial abuse. Jenny had flown in from Portland to help with the project, and she was currently directing the installation of a new kitchen with the efficiency of a general commanding troops. The contractor says we'll be ready for residents by Christmas, she called out, consulting the tablet where she'd been tracking our progress. That's ahead of schedule. Good. I want to open with a celebration that would make Grandma Rose proud. The Rose Morrison Center for Financial Independence was going to be more than just a shelter. Working with lawyers, accountants, and social workers, we designed a program that would provide not just temporary housing, but financial education, legal support, and job training for women escaping financially abusive relationships. Mrs. Thompson. The construction foreman appeared in the doorway, hard hat in hand. We found something behind the walls in the master bedroom you might want to see. I followed him upstairs to what had been my grandmother's room, where workers had exposed the original brick wall during the renovation. Built into the bricks was a small safe I'd never known existed. Can you open it? Already did. The combination was taped to the back. He handed me a manila envelope that had been sealed inside. I opened it carefully, half expecting another surprise inheritance. Instead, I found photographs and documents that told a story I'd never heard. The pictures showed my grandmother as a young woman standing outside a textile factory with a group of other women. They looked determined, professional, and completely in charge. The documents were business licenses, partnership agreements, and financial statements from Rose Morrison Imports. At the bottom of the envelope was a letter addressed to me, dated just 2 weeks before my grandmother's death. My dearest Margaret, it began. If you're reading this, it means you've started the center and the construction workers have done their job. I had this safe built specifically for this moment because I wanted you to know the whole story. The women in these photographs were my business partners in 1955. We started Rose Morrison Imports because banks wouldn't lend money to unmarried women, and married women couldn't open businesses without their husband's permission. So, we pooled our resources and created our own opportunities. 3 of these women lost everything when their husbands found out about their secret business profits and took control of their assets. That's when I learned that financial independence isn't just about making money. It's about protecting it from people who think they have a right to take it. I want you to know that every woman who walks through the doors of this house is following in the footsteps of women who've been fighting for financial freedom for generations. We're not victims. We're warriors. And this house is our fortress. The photographs and documents in this safe belong in the Sense Library. Let the women who come here know they're part of a long tradition of refusing to be financial prisoners. I'm proud of who you've become. And I'm proud of what you're building. But most of all, I'm proud that you learned what I learned 40 years too late. That the only person you can truly depend on is yourself. Love always, Grandma Rose. Yes, yes. Check the floorboards under the bedroom window. There's one more surprise. I looked at Jenny, who had followed me upstairs and was reading over my shoulder. She really thought of everything, didn't she? Everything. I knelt down by the bedroom window, running my hands over the floorboards until I found one that felt different from the others. It lifted easily, revealing another small compartment. Inside was a simple wooden box containing my grandmother's jewelry, pieces I remembered her wearing when I was a child. But there was also something I'd never seen before. A gold locket with a photograph of all the women from the textile factory. On the back, engraved in my grandmother's careful script, Financial Independence 1955 Forever. She's been planning this for 70 years, I whispered. Planning what? All of it. The business, the inheritance, the center. She was creating a legacy of financial independence for women, and I'm just the latest chapter. I fastened the locket around my neck, feeling the weight of all those women who'd fought before me, and all the women who would be helped by what we were building. My phone rang. James Morrison from Barclays calling with the monthly financial update. Good news, Mrs. Thompson. The investment portfolio is performing better than expected. You're currently sitting on just over £4 million. .4 million. Enough to fund the center for decades. Enough to help hundreds of women rebuild their lives. Enough to create the kind of financial security that no one could ever steal or manipulate. James, I want to set up an endowment fund. Something that will keep the center running indefinitely. Excellent idea. How much were you thinking? Half of everything. $2 million to create a permanent foundation. That's very generous. It's not generous. It's necessary. This work has to continue long after I'm gone. After I hung up, Jenny and I spent the afternoon going through the photographs and documents from my grandmother's safe, creating a timeline of women who'd been fighting for financial freedom decades before it was fashionable. You know what this means, don't you? Jenny said, studying a 1960s partnership agreement. You're not just opening a shelter. You're continuing a movement. I guess I am. That evening I walked through the rooms of the house, imagining them filled with women who were starting over, learning to manage their own money, discovering their own strength. The dining room would be a classroom for financial literacy workshops. The library would be filled with resources about legal rights and business planning. The sunroom would be a quiet space for counseling and support groups. And in the master bedroom, now being converted into my office, my grandmother's photographs would hang on the walls as inspiration for every woman who walked through our doors. The house was coming alive again, just as my grandmother had always intended. My phone buzzed with a text from Harold Webster. Marcus' sentencing hearing is next week. Do you want to attend? I typed back, no thank you. I'm busy building the future because that's what this was really about. Not revenge against the past, but hope for the future. Every woman who learned to protect her assets. Every divorce that ended with fair financial settlements. Every marriage that started with prenuptial agreements and separate bank accounts was a victory. Marcus Thompson had tried to destroy me financially and leave me with nothing. Instead, he'd given me the motivation to create something that would protect women for generations. I looked out the window at the garden where my grandmother had taught me to plant seeds and tend growing things. Tomorrow, construction would begin on the final phase of the renovation, a conference center where we could host workshops, seminars, and training programs. The Rose Morrison Center for Financial Independence wasn't just a shelter. It was a school, a fortress, and a launching pad for women who refused to be victims. And it was just the beginning. The grand opening of the Rose Morrison Center drew women from 6 states and 3 countries. The local media had picked up the story of the wealthy widow, who turned her childhood home into a revolutionary resource for financial abuse survivors. And suddenly, everyone wanted to know about our programs. I stood in the renovated parlor wearing my grandmother's locket and watching women tour the facilities with expressions of wonder and hope. These weren't just visitors. They were future residents, volunteer supporters, and professional allies who understood that financial abuse was often the most devastating and least discussed form of domestic violence. Mrs. Thompson, a young woman, approached me hesitantly. She looked to be in her 30s, well-dressed, but with the haunted eyes I'd learned to recognize. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I read about the center online, and I was wondering if you might have a moment to talk." I led her to the quiet alcove we'd created in what used to be my grandmother's sewing room. Sarah sat on the edge of her chair, clutching her purse like a lifeline. "My husband controls all our money," she began, the words tumbling out in a rush. "He gives me an allowance for groceries and household expenses, but I have to show him receipts for everything. I don't have access to our bank accounts, our investment portfolio, or even my own credit cards." "How long has this been going on?" 15 years. "It started gradually after we married. He said he was better with numbers, that I shouldn't worry about financial matters. I was young and stupid enough to think it was romantic." "You weren't stupid, Sarah. You were trusting. There's a difference. I want to leave, but I don't know how. I don't have any money of my own. No credit history, no job experience. He's made sure I'm completely dependent on him." I'd heard variations of this story dozens of times in the past month. Women trapped not by physical violence, but by financial chains that were just as effective at keeping them imprisoned. "Sarah, what would you do if money weren't an issue?" "If you could support yourself independently, I'd leave tomorrow. I'd take my children and start over somewhere he couldn't find us. Then let's figure out how to make that happen." I spent the next hour outlining the Sense exit planning services. We would help Sarah open secret bank accounts, document her family's assets, connect her with employment counselors, and create a step-by-step plan for financial independence. "You can do this," I told her as she prepared to leave. "I know it feels impossible, but you're stronger than you realize." "How do you know?" "Because I was where you are 2 years ago. My husband stole nearly everything I owned and planned to disappear with his mistress, leaving me broke and alone at 62. Sarah's eyes widened. "What did you do?" "I got angry. Then I got smart. Then I got even. And now," I gestured around the center at the workshops in progress, the legal aid clinic being set up in the library, the job training program starting next week. "Now I help other women get smart before they have to get even." After Sarah left, I walked through the house checking on the various activities. In the dining room, a retired banker was teaching a workshop on reading financial statements. In the sunroom, a family law attorney was explaining divorce asset protection strategies. In the garden, a group of women were discussing business plan development over tea and sandwiches. This was what my grandmother had envisioned, not just rescue but empowerment. My phone rang, an international number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Catherine Wells from the BBC. We're producing a documentary about financial abuse and we'd love to interview you about the Rose Morrison Center." "A documentary?" "The story of how you turned your own experience with financial abuse into a nationwide movement has caught international attention. We think our viewers would be very interested in your approach to the problem." A nationwide movement. Was that what this was becoming? "Mrs. Wells, I'm flattered, but I'm just one woman running one program." "Actually, Mrs. Thompson, you're much more than that. Are you aware that 17 other communities have contacted you about replicating your model?" "I wasn't aware of that. My assistant had mentioned calls from other states, but I hadn't realized the scope of the interest." "Would it be possible to schedule an interview? We could film at the center, show the programs in action." "Let me think about it." After I hung up, I called James Morrison at Barclays. "James, I need to ask you something. If I wanted to expand the Sense model to other locations, would the endowment fund be sufficient?" "How many locations?" "I'm not sure yet. Maybe a dozen to start." "Mrs. Thompson, with your current assets and the performance of your investments, you could fund 50 centers if you wanted to." 50 centers. 50 communities where women could learn financial independence, where they could escape abusive relationships with dignity and hope. James, I want to set up a foundation, something that can operate independently, accept donations and fund centers across the country. That's an excellent idea. I'll have our foundation specialist draft the paperwork immediately. That evening, I sat in my grandmother's chair in the library, surrounded by the photographs and documents we'd found in the hidden safe. The women in those pictures had started their own businesses when it was nearly impossible for women to do so. They'd fought for financial independence when the entire system was designed to keep them dependent. Now it was my turn to fight, not just for my own freedom, but for the freedom of women I'd never meet, in towns I'd never visit, facing battles I could barely imagine. My laptop chimed with an email notification. It was from Patricia Cole, the investigator who'd helped uncover Marcus' hidden assets. Mrs. Thompson, I have news you'll want to hear. Marcus Thompson died in federal prison yesterday. Heart attack. Thought you should know. I stared at the email for a long time, waiting to feel something. Sadness, relief, vindication. Instead, I felt empty. Marcus had destroyed his life for money he'd never gotten to spend, running schemes that had ultimately led to his death in a federal prison cell. He'd lost everything, his freedom, his health, his life, while I'd gained everything he'd tried to steal from me and more. But his death didn't feel like victory. Felt like waste. I closed the laptop and walked through the center one more time before bed. In the morning, I would call the BBC and agree to the interview. I would start planning for a national foundation. I would begin the work of turning one small center in Ohio into a movement that could help women across the country. But tonight, I would simply remember the woman I'd been 2 years ago. Scared, betrayed, and convinced her life was over at 62. That woman couldn't have imagined what was possible when you combined anger with intelligence, resources with purpose, and personal pain with a commitment to preventing others from suffering the same way. Tomorrow the real work would begin. 2 years later, I stood on the stage at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., looking out at an audience of senators, advocacy groups, and survivors preparing to give the keynote address at the National Conference on Financial Abuse Prevention. The Rose Morrison Foundation now operated 37 centers across the United States, with international inquiries coming in weekly. We'd helped over 2,000 women achieve financial independence, trained hundreds of professionals to recognize financial abuse, and lobbied successfully for new laws protecting victims' rights to hidden assets. But more important than the numbers were the faces. Women like Sarah Mitchell, who now ran our Atlanta center after building a successful consulting business. Women like Patricia Davidson, who'd exposed her husband's Ponzi scheme and helped the FBI recover millions for his victims. Women who'd learned that financial independence wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, choice, and the freedom to determine their own futures. Ladies and gentlemen, I began 2 years ago. I was a statistic. A 62-year-old woman whose husband had systematically stolen her financial security while planning to abandon her for a younger woman. According to conventional wisdom, I should have been grateful for whatever scraps I could salvage from the wreckage of my marriage. I paused, looking out at the audience of powerful people who were finally taking financial abuse seriously. Instead, I got angry. And then I got smart. And then I discovered something my grandmother had known for 70 years. That the best revenge against financial abuse isn't just getting your money back. It's making sure other women never have to fight that battle alone. The applause was immediate and thunderous. But I wasn't finished. The Rose Morrison Foundation exists because my grandmother, Rose Morrison, spent decades preparing for a betrayal she hoped would never come, but knew probably would. She couldn't prevent my husband from trying to destroy me financially, but she could make sure I had the resources to fight back. I clicked to the next slide in my presentation, showing a photograph of the original Rose Morrison Imports partners from 1955. These women understood something we're only now beginning to acknowledge: that financial abuse is not a private family matter. It's a criminal enterprise that destroys lives, devastates children, and costs our economy billions of dollars every year. Another click showing statistics that made the audience shift uncomfortably. 99% of domestic violence cases involve financial abuse. Victims stay in dangerous relationships an average of 7 years longer when they lack financial resources to leave. Women who escape financially abusive relationships face poverty rates 3 times higher than the general population. I closed the presentation and stepped away from the podium, speaking directly to the crowd. But here's what those statistics don't tell you. What happens when we give women the tools to protect themselves financially? When we teach them about separate bank accounts, credit monitoring, and asset protection strategies. When we provide legal support, business training, and long-term mentorship. I paused again, thinking about Sarah, Patricia, and all the other women who transformed their lives through the Foundation's programs. They don't just survive, they thrive. They start businesses, buy homes, send their children to college, and most importantly, they help other women do the same. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. But the real impact came afterward during the networking session, when senators approached me about federal funding, when prosecutors asked about training programs, when survivors shared their own stories of triumph over financial abuse. That evening I had dinner with Jenny and James Morrison, who'd flown in from London for the conference. "Your grandmother would be so proud," James said, raising his glass of wine. "You've exceeded every dream she had for this foundation." "I think I'm just getting started," I replied. "We've proven the model works domestically. Now I want to take it international." "International?" Jenny raised an eyebrow. "Maggie, you're 65 years old. Don't you think you've done enough?" I thought about all the emails I received from women in other countries describing financial abuse that made American cases look simple by comparison. Women in cultures where they couldn't own property, open bank accounts, or work outside the home without male permission. "Jenny, my grandmother was fighting financial abuse for 70 years. I've barely gotten started." James smiled. "What did you have in mind?" "I want to establish centers in London, Dublin, Toronto, and Sydney to start. Create an international network of resources and support. Develop training programs that can be adapted to different legal systems and cultural contexts." "That's ambitious." "It's necessary." After dinner, I walked back to my hotel through the streets of Washington, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. 3 years ago, I'd been a betrayed wife fleeing to her childhood home with nothing but rage and determination. Now I was the founder of an international foundation, a recognized expert on financial abuse, and a woman who turned her personal nightmare into hope for thousands of others. My phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah Mitchell. "Just helped our 100th client at the Atlanta Center. She's opening her own accounting firm next month. Thank you for showing us what's possible." I smiled, thinking about that terrified woman who'd approached me at the Cent's grand opening, convinced she was trapped forever in a financially abusive marriage. Now she was helping other women discover their own strength and independence. That's what the foundation was really about. Not rescue but transformation. Not charity but empowerment. Not victims but warriors. I reached my hotel and took the elevator to my suite, looking forward to tomorrow's meetings with international advocacy groups. There was so much work still to do, so many women who needed to know that financial independence was possible at any age, in any circumstances. Before bed, I called the London flat that was still technically my primary residence, checking my answering machine for messages. Among the usual business calls was one that made me smile. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Elizabeth Harper from Oxford University. We'd like to offer you an honorary doctorate in recognition of your groundbreaking work in financial abuse prevention. The ceremony would be in June if you're available, an honorary doctorate from Oxford University." My grandmother, who'd never finished high school but had built a business empire through sheer determination, would have gotten such a kick out of that. I opened my laptop and began drafting a reply to Elizabeth Harper, accepting the honor on behalf of all the women who taught me that strength could emerge from betrayal, that wisdom could grow from pain, and that the best response to being underestimated was proving everyone wrong. Outside my window, Washington, D.C. sparkled in the darkness, full of power and possibility. Tomorrow, I would meet with lawmakers about strengthening financial abuse legislation. Next month, I would break ground on the first International Rose Morrison Center in London. Next year, I would publish the book that would teach women around the world how to protect themselves financially before they needed protecting. But tonight, I would simply remember the moment when I'd found that suitcase in my grandmother's bedroom, filled with cash and possibilities I'd never imagined. That woman had thought her life was ending. This woman knew it was just beginning. I closed my laptop and walked to the window, looking out at the city where powerful people made decisions that affected millions of lives. Tomorrow, some of those decisions would include funding for financial abuse prevention programs, legal protections for survivors, and educational initiatives that would teach young women to value their financial independence, as much as their romantic relationships. My grandmother had spent 70 years fighting for women's financial freedom. I'd spent 3 years building on her foundation, and somewhere out there, women I'd never meet were discovering their own strength, planning their own escapes, building their own futures. The war against financial abuse was far from over, but tonight it felt like we were winning. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. Music.